Everyone knows the story of the giants, right? When we think of ancient biblical lore, our minds immediately go straight to these towering warriors, terrifying entire armies. We picture Goliath facing down David, the earth literally shaking with every single step. Or we think of Og of Bashan and the absolutely intimidating scale of his massive iron bet. The famous narrative tells us that the Watchers descended from heaven, took human wives, and produced these massive offspring known as the Nephilim. It's a story of violent clashes, superhuman strength, and ultimate physical dominance. Okay, let's dive into this, because hidden just beneath the surface of that famous narrative is a mystery so massive and frankly so strange that most people never even notice it. In this explainer, we're going to look at the hidden side of the Watcher's offspring, and trust me, it completely changes how we understand this entire chapter of ancient history.
So, this brings us to what I think is the most glaring logical hole in the entire Nephilim narrative. If the Watchers created an entirely new race on Earth, why do we only ever hear about their giant sons? Seriously, think about it. Did these heavenly beings and their human wives somehow defy all laws of biology and produce 100% male offspring? The odds of that are, well, astronomical. Actually, it's virtually impossible. If an entire hybrid population was born, basic biology dictates that roughly half of them should have been female. So what exactly happened to the daughters of the Nephilim? Were they simply forgotten by ancient writers who were just way too focused on the battlefields? Or, more chillingly, were they erased from the record on purpose?
To figure this out, we really have to look closely at the original language. Most modern readers see the word Nephilim and instantly imagine an army of heavily armed giant men. But here's the thing. In ancient Hebrew, masculine plural forms act as a catch-all to include both men and women. It's actually a lot like how a mixed gender group of friends today might be casually addressed as guys. The language itself never explicitly limits the Nephilim to just a male fighting force. Instead, the term implies a complete demographic, a fully functioning society. This linguistic reality proves the female Nephilim almost certainly existed right alongside the men. They were there. The original text entirely allows for them.
Which brings us to a rather unsettling thought. If the ancient language allows for them, and basic biology basically demands them, why does the text never explicitly mention the daughters? I want you to consider how history is traditionally written. It's usually penned by the victors, and it almost exclusively focuses on the highly visible, bloody clashes of the battlefield. But what if the biblical writers deliberately downplayed or even erased these women from history? Why? Because the threat they posed was fundamentally different and far more insidious than the men.
And this brilliantly illustrates a completely different kind of danger. The difference between these two threats changes absolutely everything. On one side, you have the males, a military threat. A military threat is loud, right? You can see it coming. Giant warriors tearing up battlefields. And the thing about a military threat is that eventually you can eliminate it through war. You kill the warriors, you end the threat. But on the flip side, consider the genetic threat posed by the females. A genetic threat moves off the battlefield and into the home. It becomes a bloodline. It's a corruption capable of spreading silently, generation after generation, through quiet marriages, shared meals, and hidden descendants just mingling among ordinary people. It is a creeping, invisible infiltration of humanity itself. To really investigate this genetic threat, we need to step outside the standard biblical canon for a moment. Ancient communities consider texts like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls to be highly sacred, and they tell a very specific story. When detailing the Watcher's children, they deliberately use biologically neutral words like offspring or descendants. The language actively avoids distinguishing between sons and daughters. Now, this opens a terrifying door. Imagine a female Nephilim, perhaps appearing mostly human but secretly carrying this corrupted DNA, marrying a human man. What exactly are their children? Are they human? Partially Nephilim? These ancient extra-biblical texts use inclusive language that perfectly sets the stage for a rampant, totally silent hybridization across the ancient world.
The official records might be quiet, but if we listen closely to cultural folklore, we find echoes of this hybrid ancestry everywhere. In later Jewish traditions, you have figures like Lilith. While she's often dismissed as pure myth, older sources like the Zohar describe her as something hovering between human and spiritual, like a ruler among supernatural entities connected directly to the restless spirits of the Nephilim. Then you have ancient Arabian and Ethiopian legends of the Queen of Sheba, whose immense wisdom and very unusual physical traits heavily hinted at a mysterious, possibly non-human lineage, or even the biblical Sarah, whose unnatural beauty in her old age literally astonished entire kingdoms. You see, in the ancient world, unnatural beauty wasn't just considered attractive the way we think of it today. It was viewed as a literal red flag of divine or highly unusual ancestry. These myths aren't just fairy tales, folks.
They might be preserving the fragmented memories of a forgotten hybrid bloodline hiding in plain sight.
Now let's fast forward a bit. The flood was supposed to wipe out the ancient world's corruption, right? Yet after the waters recede, giants appear again. We see the Anakim, the Rephaim, and later the inhabitants of Philistine cities like Goth. Pointing this out reveals a massive logical flaw in how we usually read this history. Goth wasn't just a military camp, it was a functioning city. And let's be real, entire cities cannot survive on warriors alone. Someone has to farm, trade, and raise the next generation of 10-foot-tall toddlers. Families lived there, generations passed there, which means giant women absolutely had to be there, walking the markets and carrying the bloodline forward. The men fought the wars, sure, but the women were the biological engine perpetuating the existence of the giants. History simply remembers the ones holding the swords.
Let's slow down for a second and really think about the implications of this. If this hybridization was happening, if female Nephilim were successfully marrying into human families, then the corruption of the pre-flood world wasn't just a military issue of violent giants roaming the hills. No, the crisis was systemic. It was embedded deep within the human family tree. Humanity itself was being quietly, irreparably rewritten from the inside out.
Which brings us to the story of Noah. The biblical text uses a very specific and heavily debated phrase to describe him. It says he was perfect in his generations. So the crucial point is this: many ancient readers understood this not just as a statement about Noah's upstanding morality, but as a literal statement about his lineage. It was a declaration that Noah's family tree remained entirely untouched by the genetic corruption that was consuming the rest of humanity. The flood, therefore, wasn't merely a judgment against violence. It was a targeted, desperate genetic reset. Literally a planetary quarantine designed to break a hybrid chain that had spread far deeper and wider than anyone realized.
The giants eventually disappeared. Their cities fell to ruin, and their fearsome names faded into myth. But as we've explored throughout this explainer, sometimes the most important part of a story isn't the loud, highly visible part that survives. It's the quiet part that was left out. It reminds us that the greatest threats to humanity aren't always the loudest ones. If the daughters of the Nephilim truly existed, and the language, logic, and ancient folklore suggests they absolutely did, then the most dangerous aspect of the Watchers' rebellion wasn't the ancient battlefield. It was a silent, unbroken genetic infiltration. So, I have to ask, is the greatest legacy of the Nephilim what history chose to forget? I'll leave you to think about that terrifying, thousands-of-year-old silence.